Hi, welcome to Tea Time, hosted by the New Jersey Tea Party Coalition. And my name is Adrienne Savage, and today we're here with Katie O'Malley, who is a writer and conservative activist. And today we're going to discuss some topical issues, as well as how one person can make a difference. Thank you.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
So one of the things that you are here to discuss is how one person can make a difference. But before you do this, tell us about that. Tell me a little bit about your background and how you became involved.
I come from a very political family, very left-wing family.
Really? Okay.
And my grandfather's a congressman. Other members of the family have been in various offices. So talking about politics and topical issues was part of the dinner table conversation. And there was a point in my life where I thought, I'm not making the connection to what they're telling me and what sounds correct.
Right.
And we had a congressman come to my high school. I went to a K-12 school. I was actually only in 6th grade at the time. I think he thought he was coming to get teenagers to work on his campaign, and instead he got 12-year-old me, John Porter from Illinois. And he made me learn about his campaign. And I was 12 years old, and every day my mom, God bless her, didn't necessarily agree with my politics, but appreciated my passion, and she dropped me off there. And that was really the beginning. And I think it was a pretty horrifying experience for a good deal of my family. But that was the first campaign I worked on. And I was struck not only by how interesting it was to feel that engaged with the things that were impacting me at that moment and then in the future. I was lucky enough to have someone who valued that individual. You know, he could have very easily put me in a room stuffing envelopes, but he made me learn his platform. Wow. And he took me out to campaign stops. And I think that, you know, that as someone who was young, that was something that was incredibly valuable. And you know, we were talking before we started a little bit about young people.
Yes.
And I think that that was an amazing moment to have this adult who was running for a very important position treated me like I was valued and my opinion was valued. I think if we as activists and conservatives find ways to connect with young people like he did with me, that's what got me going. I was engaged intellectually because of my family. I became an activist because someone who was a conservative valued me at a young age.
And they took the time. So how can one person really make a difference? So many of us, or so many people out there, may be feeling as though I'm just one person. What difference does it make? We hear it all the time when people talk about, oh, my vote doesn't count. So what are some ways one person can make a difference?
I understand the frustration, especially when you live in certain towns. You know, you can, I know that there are conservatives in New York who still go to the polls, even though they know it's not going to make an impact from an electoral college standpoint. But if you take a look at the number of, if you look really closely at the numbers for this past election and the one before it, how many races, not just presidential races, but how many races were impacted by a handful of votes. You add that up. I'm in Madison, New Jersey, and you know, Romney solidly won Madison, but people who voted in the presidential ballot failed to vote for congressional, senatorial, and our town council. So we lost 2 seats on our town council because people just punched that one thing on the ticket, and your vote does count, and people need to stop thinking just from a presidential standpoint. You know, it goes all the way down to school board elections.
How do we get to getting individuals more engaged, not engaged as well as educated in terms of the process?
I think it's it can seem overwhelming when you look at the numbers, and I like to remind people, I don't know how everyone felt the morning they woke up after this past election, I was not in a good mood. Very disheartened, very frustrated, and thought about giving up. And I've been doing this for how many decades now without revealing my age, since I was 12. And the thing that made me pause and recalibrate was remembering that in 2004, far-left liberal Democrats woke up that Wednesday morning and said, how could this have happened? How could I not know my country, that they could have elected this horrible failure of a president? And what they did was not say, I give up, I'm going to stop.
Well, I'll say this. I think their rebounds, and I'm not going to say that conservatives aren't going to rebound. I think we certainly will. But liberals have a much greater edge because they've been at it for a much longer time.
I will agree.
And their roots are very deep into the system. And conservatives, you know, again, we also talked about our message, and we talked about not just how we speak to people. So how can we begin getting our message out and being a little bit more positive and reaching a broader demographic?
Well, I think there's a couple things. You know, I grew up in the 70s with the shampoo commercial,
right,
where someone would say, you know, oh, I liked it so much, I'll tell 2 friends, and
right,
you'll tell 2 friends,
okay,
and so on and so on. And suddenly, the screen is filled with the number of people you touch. And so it doesn't always have to be, I personally am going to reach 10,000 people.
Right.
If you start locally, and you really impact locally, your own children, sitting at the dinner table, taking them out to events, getting them engaged, helping them if they're trying to do things at their high school, at their colleges. And I think the messaging is incredibly important. One of the big mistakes I think we make, and I'm guilty of it too, is that we look at this process as being an election cycle process. That's and the true. Difference between us and the left is they've never seen it as an election cycle. They don't count in 12-month or 2-year or 4-year increments. They count in decades. It's how they've had the impact on our school systems. Right. It's how they've affected Hollywood. You know, part of why I love old Hollywood is I can see Hollywood actors from the 40s, 50s, even into the early 60s, who are proud to be Americans, who are proud of our military, and that they looked at shifting that, not overnight, right, but over decades. And that's how they've done their messaging, and we've let them steal our message.
Oh, yes, we have. They've been very effective.
They've stolen our message. And part of it is I think, a level of fear on our part. Andrew Breitbart, to me, was such a hero and so brave and such an amazing guy. And I learned so much from him. And one of the things that always struck me is that he learned how to deal with people hurling things at him. Right. So they loved to call him a racist. Yeah. They loved to call him a homophobe. Yeah. And I think early on, we all react badly to that because we think, I'm not. Right. We're disagreeing. And so people backed away from a valid argument for fear of name calling. And I think part of that has to change, but I think also we all are reacting to how much negativism and fear there is out there. And we were talking before about how many emails can I get in a day with the subject line, oh my God, look at what they're doing now. Right. The constant fear-mongering among ourselves and our own people. You know, Ronald Reagan came to office during a time, I mean, the 70s, they were bleak. Yeah. It was a bleak time. I remember just how dark and gray that vibe was. But
was there fear? I almost feel that there's a sense of not only the malaise, but actual fear.
I think that it is definitely more pronounced now, and it's hard for me. I was a kid then, and I knew something was wrong. I think now as a parent, my fear is heightened of everything because I fear for my children, I fear for their children, the next generation. And I do think that we have lost so much ideological ground in terms of our willingness to say who we are and be proud of it. I am a conservative.
Right.
I believe in these things. I believe in these things because I think they're right for this country, a country that I love, and right for the people that I care about. Even if I disagree with them politically, I'm not trying to starve anyone. Right. I'm not trying to give people less options. I believe that the free market conservative solutions are better for all of us. But I'm not hearing that out there really from candidates or from parties the way you did from Reagan.
And I guess that's what's so troubling, because we may all personally feel these things, but we're really having such a difficult time articulating them.
I think it's the messaging. I don't think it's the message. I do think it is the messaging. And we talked about how do you connect to other groups? How do you connect to minorities, to women, to people under 30? I think articulating those messages to them is what is going to get them to understand who we are more than fear-mongering. I mean, social media is such a wonderful way to get information, but sometimes I have to turn it off because there's only so many negative Facebook posts or conspiracies, and I'm not saying that there aren't some horrible things going on out there, but I don't know how that pushes our message forward.
And I think in our next segment, we'll get into that a little bit more deeply, is really how we can begin taking our message back, because the liberals have been so effective in getting us in a corner and to shut up and to be quiet and to not even use words in terms of what's actually happening. So we're going to talk about that in our next segment, and we'll be back in a few moments.
With all the excitement happening with the Tea Party, it may be a little hard to separate fact from fiction. Find out the truth for yourself. Visit the New Jersey Tea Party Coalition's website at www.njteapartycoalition.org. You may find a common voice to your concerns on how our government is functioning, and discover a means to help restore our nation based on the proven principles of our Constitution.
Welcome back to Tea Time, hosted by the New Jersey Tea Party Coalition. And we're here with our guest, Katie O'Malley, and we're going to get back into our discussion about messaging, the conservative message, and turning it around so it's positive.
I don't know if you've had a chance to listen to Artur Davis.
Yes, I have.
I had a chance to hear him in person a few months ago, and I was really struck by what he said, and it really hit a chord with me, because he talked about how he's been a lifelong Democrat in the South, and reaching populations in general. I'm not just dividing by racial lines, but socioeconomic lines and age lines. The messaging of self-sufficiency should not always go hand in hand with a criticism.
Right.
And he was talking about, ways to let people know that part of what we're talking about is giving them options, not taking things away. Right. And I had a friend who, we really got into this conversation one night, and she kind of blew my mind a little bit, in the sense that she said, if you're a single mother and you're dependent on these government programs, you're a mom, you're a tiger, you'd do anything for your kids.
Sure.
And so in some ways we're asking people to say no to these things for the betterment of liberty and our country, without really providing alternatives. And I feel like we in our communities have some free market options that we also haven't properly explored. And if we want to prove that those free market options are an alternative, we need, as a community, need to support those efforts. I think there's some good things going on with that.
So give us some example of We talk about a mother who's on public assistance and she's dependent on it. And we all know that more dependent someone comes on the system, the more likely they're going to vote for those individuals who are going to continue that check coming in because they're either not educated or, you know, they don't see the opportunities that they may have. So how do we change that messaging into something that's positive and one where individuals aren't thinking, well, conservatives want to take away my paycheck and leave me in a situation where now I have no way to take care of my children?
I think school choice is a really good example.
That's a perfect example
of something sort of in that venue, and it's not a check that comes, but I think that is a really good example of how to have the free market compete with this government behemoth that has gotten out of control and no longer fits the needs of communities. And when you look at from a demographic standpoint, the folks who support school choice in huge numbers that also support a Democrat Party that does not believe in school choice, that's a great example of something to really hang on to, because that's the free market doing it better.
So how is that message getting drowned out? Because we've seen movies such as what was it? The one on the New Jersey educational system, The Cartel.
The Cartel.
Where they did an expose on these inner cities, these overly Democrat communities where the educational systems were very poor, and they created charter schools, and these children were put in a lottery, and they were crying. They were devastated when they didn't have this opportunity. How do we help connect the dots for those individuals that they're choosing to vote for people who are now putting them in this very same situation where their child is being forced to be in a lottery to have a better education?
Well, and it's beyond mediocrity. I mean, they're choosing, it's not even just for the status quo. I mean, they're really suffering in these schools. I mean, The Cartel's a perfect example. And then there was the Hollywood movie that came out that the unions...
Waiting for Superman.
The Hollywood was horrified.
Yeah.
I think pop culture really actually does matter. So I think those things help get it out to a wider audience. But those things aren't going to break through to the real pop culture.
Right.
And so, people respond to things that are relatable. And we've got some superstars. We've got some people in the movement who aren't necessarily politicians, but we've got entrepreneurs who've started businesses. We have people who are fighting for school choice who I think are relatable. I think they need to feel more backed and alone. And you and I were also talking about sort of the fear of that a lot of us sometimes feel of putting ourselves out there because of the heaps of abuse that we know we're going to take. Anyone who wants to know what it's like, go read Michelle Malkin's Twitter feed one day. Talk about war on women. Talk about racist and just abusive and brutal, simply for speaking her mind.
Right.
I think that you do have some brave people who step up. We all don't need to stand in front of a computer and do it, or be on a TV show to do it. Even in your own workforce, even engaging your friends. I know my children roll their eyes if their friends are over and I start on a topic, but you never know. It's that shampoo commercial.
Yes.
You do not have to reach 10,000 people. Reach 10. Reach those 10 and do it passionately and be brave. Give
me some examples of how you, I guess, connect with people on a day-to-day basis.
I'll give you a good example. When I first moved to New York, I'm from Chicago, so I was pretty used to being kind of not in the culture there. Lived in the South for 7 years, where I couldn't believe the first time I walked into a post office and it said Merry Christmas. I thought the ACLU's got to be right behind me in a truck with bazookas or something. When I first moved to New York, I took a job in an industry that's very, very typically left. And I kept myself buttoned down. I kept myself quiet for so long because even though I'm pretty outspoken, I just didn't want to take the sneering and the comments. And finally one day I'd sort of had it. And this whole group of people was, it was actually a harassment seminar that we all had to go through in management, and everyone had to talk about.
The irony of that, right?
I know, harassment. And so it was sexual harassment and racial harassment and, you know, gay rights and all this. And I finally sort of raised my hand, and my boss at the time was a wonderful man who did know where I stood. I could just see him sort of going, because he knew where I was going.
Yeah.
And I said, okay, what about harassing people for their political beliefs? Well, this very lefty institution in place. Oh, well, that never happens here. I said, when I walk to my cubicle, I pass no less than 5 negative, really ugly cartoons about Bush, including one as an ape.
Yeah.
And if that was done in a racial component, someone would be sitting either in HR or gone from this institution. I'm a conservative. I find that to be harassing, and it offends me. So if we're talking, and there are people who kind of wouldn't talk to me, but steered clear of me for a little while because I was in their midst now.
Yes.
And they knew they couldn't get away with things. And because I worked with donors at the time, I had to remind them, your donor base is ecumenical.
Right.
You've got people on all ends of the spectrum here. How offensive for a potential donor to come in here. You don't know who's a Republican, who's a Democrat, who's liberal, who's conservative. That was actually kind of a scary thing. And I really did have to think about it because I thought this could be sort of volatile enough. I wasn't rude, but I thought I'm outing myself in a liberal setting. Mm-hmm. You've got people in Hollywood. Let's look at some of the people like Adam Baldwin, Kevin Sorbo, who just came out, Bruce Willis, who just had a thing. You know, those settings, I mean, they've got real consequences to the tunes of millions and millions of dollars. Those things matter in your world. If you are at church and you see something going on, I went to a wonderful Catholic church in Georgia, and there was so much liberal sermoning coming out of our priest, and I loved him as an individual. But there were times where we got up and walked out as a family, and I made sure people knew why we were leaving, and we were not the only ones to do it. It's like when you have a bad child, a spoiled child.
Yes.
And it doesn't even have to be a horrible kid, but you go through the terrible 2s and 3s. I don't understand people who keep them in the restaurant and it just keeps going. You have to grab that kid and you leave. And sometimes that means you leave your family, you leave your friends, you leave a party. You have to do those things. You have to put yourself out there, and it doesn't need to be on a world stage like Bruce Willis. Thanksgiving dinner, where cousin Joe is constantly screaming about these horrible, those things matter, because the reason the left has been successful at demonizing us is that they have dehumanized us.
Right, and we've been silent.
We have been silent.
And we've been taking it for a long time. And I think one of the things that the left does very successfully is they assume everybody thinks like they do.
Yep.
And, you know, I think we've accepted the role of being the minority.
Yes.
So we say nothing.
Yep.
And I believe that if we did speak out more and we did voice, I mean, it doesn't have to be a rude thing. What you did was perfectly fine. Just letting people know that, hey, I'm a conservative and I'm proud to be conservative. And then people will stop feeling so alone, you know, or feeling like that they have to be on board with the other side.
And, you know, I think the Tea Party movement, you know, I've been in Republican politics for my whole life. And I remember the first Tea Party event I went to in Morristown. And what has stayed with me that whole time was looking at people, looking around that crowd, and seeing people they knew.
Right.
And somebody that they had seen before at the dentist's office, at the carpool line. And then I watched those same people over time having those conversations in the carpool line, being at a sporting event. And that's some of the people that I now connect with, I'm not sure I would have known where they stood. And people sort of were very quiet and stood and weren't sure what to expect, and now they feel comfortable. They're not alone.
And you know what, going back to what you said before, is it makes you human again.
Yep.
Because if they one of the things that I'll often do is, most everyone at work now knows I'm conservative, but of course everybody assumed that I wasn't, that I was a Democrat. And if you're showing them you're a nice person, you're doing what you do every day, you're efficient at your job, you say hello to everybody, and then all of a sudden they find out you're conservative. Well, they realize that you're a normal human being, right, like the rest of them, and that you're not walking around with a pitchfork and and wishing evil thoughts on everyone.
We're not trying to starve children and push old people off cliffs. Despite the DNC commercials that they have about us, we're not. We have different viewpoints, and I blame the left to some degree, but I blame us more for exactly what you said. We should be loud and proud.
But and I think that's something that most people can do.
It can be at a dinner table, at an office, at their church, at the grocery store. Not everyone needs to be an activist out there.
You're absolutely right. But also because we touched on the messaging a little bit, and I think it ties in somewhat. And we talked about the left hijacking our language and twisting it around. And so what are some of your thoughts about that, and how we can become better at our language?
That's a hard one, but I think it goes back to bravery. Yeah. I think it really goes back to bravery. I think that they're really doing a disservice to minorities and women when they scream about racism or war on women while practicing things that are actually truly heinous. Right. We talked about gun control. They say that Republicans are waging a war on women, but then they're going to tell someone who lives out in the country in the middle of nowhere or in the inner city where criminals aren't going to abide by gun laws.
Absolutely
You're going to tell
not.
A single mother who's responsible for her children that she cannot protect her family? That to me is a war on women. That to me is a war on children. I think that the messaging needs to be firm, direct, specific, and then we can't back away from it.
Right.
Even with the gun control, I know that most of the people that I talk to, even some Democrats, do not like the extremes that there are going with gun control. And yet I know Republicans and conservatives who don't want to be too verbal about their support because they don't want to be a gun nut, or they don't want to be seen as someone who's not sympathetic to the tragedies that happen. We need to turn it around to what it is. Sandy Hook was a tragedy, and there's some mental health issues that are behind so much of that. And nobody's looking at that state and how the bills that were not passed that would have helped that. Nobody wants to look at the social stigma that that mother and that family went through with those issues. Those are things that we can do to change their narrative. Right now, they own it.
Wow. We've covered a lot today.
We have.
But we're going to wrap up. And it's been a pleasure.
Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it.
Everyone out there, please remember to go to the New Jersey Tea Party Coalition.org website, and we'll be posting our sit down today. And is there a website that they can catch you on?
Humanevents.com, and also my Twitter, just Katie O'Malley, all one word. That's where I do most of my proselytizing.
All right, great. And thank you again for being with us.
Thank you.